I mean, I think the first time he was nominated for an Oscar might have been American Sniper.
Was that the first?
I think maybe. I mean, I'm thinking of other things that had him nominated. It was like that.
Nightmare Alley most recently.
Was he? He might have been nominated for American Hustle.
Could have been.
Do you like that movie?
American Hustle?
Yeah.
I like it. It's not a movie that like really sticks out in my mind.
I've only seen it once. I think it's a movie where I wanted it to be more entertaining. Like, I think it's a quality movie, but I think I wanted it to be like a Goodfellas, which Goodfellas to me is kind of breakneck entertainment the entire time.
Yeah.
And I think that's what I went in expecting, probably unfairly. But I think there are slow moments and stuff, and then every now and then you'll get a pocket of that same type of humor and stuff that a Goodfellas has, where it's super fun. And then I think a lot of other parts are kind of like, it's well done, but it's just not super engaging for me. At least.
Is that David O. Russell or?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. I would agree with that. It has moments, and I think the Christian Bale character is fun. I think the characters are fun. It has It does have those elements of what could be the making of a good Scorsese movie. It's just I saw it in theaters, and it was a part of that Oscar campaign that year.
Yeah,
and I thought it was a pretty good. It was one of the better movies that year, but it's not like a movie that I feel the need to revisit.
Yeah, it was a big deal for Jennifer Lawrence too.
Yeah,
like I think that was considered one of her best performances.
Yeah, she had a couple of scenes.
Yeah. So anyway,
yeah,
talking about Tarantino today.
Heavyweight champion.
I was thinking I need you to start bringing some references of like your favorite stuff. I don't know how many of these are actually movies that you love. I mean, I know you love Once Upon a Time.
Yeah, I like Swingers. I like Social Network. I like Sideways a lot. Is that Enter the Void?
No, that's totally unrelated. I kind of have this.
Drive is a badass movie.
Yeah, I honestly kind of all started.
I like Back to the Future, but I'm not like a huge. I'm not one of those people.
I went and saw. Katie had never seen Back to the Future, and we went and saw it at the. Do you know what Cinespia is?
No.
It's a thing they do out here that's really popular, and I'd been hearing about it for years, and then I had never gone, and then Katie was like, "Hey, I know I haven't seen it, and we had planned on watching it together for the first time, but they show movies up on the side of a building on a projector at the Hollywood Cemetery."
I had no idea.
Yeah, and so they do it at night. It's pretty cool. Like, you go out, you can rent like beach chairs, or no, you bring chairs, and then you sit out there and bring your own food and stuff.
That's pretty cool.
So it is a cool idea. The only thing that sucks is like it's almost always classic movies, I'm pretty sure. And so the problem is you can know like, oh, they're doing Back to the Future. It's like, that's going to be an insane
a lot of
crowd.
People are gonna go see that,
And so it's like, go early, and there's a lot of traffic and stuff. But fortunately, we found a good spot. But my little brother had never seen it, and she had never seen it. And embarrassing to say, I hadn't watched it in a long time, even though I've probably seen it 50 times. I was like emotionally tearing up when watching it because I hadn't watched it in maybe 2 years or something. And I'm just like, God damn, this movie is good. Like, just nostalgia wrapped up in actually thinking it's brilliant. I think probably similarly to how you feel about Jaws.
I was actually just gonna say that. I was like, because when I went and saw Jaws again, I don't know if it was it must have been an anniversary thing this past year. It was released into IMAX.
Yeah.
Oh my God, was that
powerful?
A powerful cinematic experience to see like the ocean that large.
Yeah.
And to see the shark. Yeah, it was an intense cinematic experience. But I'd always wanted to see Jaws in a theater.
They used to. The ArcLight used to do this thing, RIP, where it was like
that's not even back yet, or there's nothing.
ArcLight's out of business.
But what about? Am I thinking about? Was ArcLight the Cinerama? Was that the same company?
Yeah.
Is the Cinerama?
So the Cinerama, I think, was like the most popular ArcLight there was, like the dome, and that shut down.
The Cinerama was not back in
I don't
business?
think so.
Wow.
Because that was ArcLight.
Yeah, there's one in one at, like the Sherman Oaks.
For people who don't live in LA, ArcLight was a very popular movie chain, and it was good. and they used to do things. I can't remember what it was, but it was like Tuesday nights or something. They would always have a classic movie showing, and I remember they showed Jaws one time. But anyway,
One of Tarantino's favorite movies, Jaws.
makes sense. It's brilliant.
Yeah.
That shot, talking about the ocean, that shot where, God, I've only seen it a handful of times because I hadn't seen it until we did our first podcast. But who's the? I'm wanting to say Clint. Is Clint the? Quint.
The shark hunter?
Quint. Yes. When he's on the front of the boat.
Yeah.
And it's not the shot where it's like sunset, where it's up close and he's just like his silhouette, but the shot where it's behind him, where he's standing, and it's almost like 90% of the screen is just ocean.
Yeah.
And you just see him at the bottom of the frame. That's such an awesome shot. Yeah. Because it just gives you that feeling of really being out on the ocean.
Out on the ocean.
But yeah, the great
Hunting a monster.
All right, where do we want to start?
With Tarantino?
Yeah. Throw out
what I like about him or something?
Yeah.
Well, first of all, I just got to say he's got a real knack for world building.
Yeah. God,
We'll throw back to the first episode.
Classic.
Which he does. That's genuine. He actually does have... because I've just watched... I had like Inglourious Bastards playing in the background while I was doing stuff, and I didn't... The last podcast we did with Giselle, I like sat down and watched like a few of the movies, but like I've seen so many of these Tarantino movies like so many times. We were talking about Seinfeld. It's the same type of thing. I've seen every one of his movies no less than like... I'd say Death Proof is the movie I've seen the least, and I've still seen that probably like... I don't know.
Yeah, I don't
a dozen times.
I don't. Damn.
A half a dozen. Well, maybe not a dozen,
wild.
but close. More than a half a dozen.
I don't think I've seen... I know I haven't seen Death Proof all the way through.
Really?
Yeah.
Okay. Death Proof is funny because I actually waited to watch Death Proof because he got ripped apart so bad, and I just thought to myself, I don't know if I could watch him make a really bad movie. And it wasn't my thing at the time, especially like a grungy, like whatever that is, like an ode to those 70 or those like not what would those movies be?
Yeah, I don't know what you would call that.
But they were a specific genre of movies.
Yeah.
But like,
does it kind of have like a Mad Max vibe a little bit?
A little bit. Well, Kurt Russell is the bad guy. He's like a killer. He kills people with his death-proof stunt car.
Yeah.
And then I watched it, and it's like it's not my favorite movie. It's not my favorite Tarantino movie, but I'm like, this is better than 90-something% of movies.
Yeah.
Still,
it's kind of like
his worst movie.
I'm not saying it's the same thing, but I think a lot of people think of Burn After Reading as one of the Coen brothers' worst movies. But I actually think that movie's a lot of fun.
I love that movie, and I thought that movie is just so much ado about nothing, and there's so much chaos and murder and mayhem is caused over nothing. Really,
one of my favorite George Clooney performances ever. Oh yeah, genuinely.
What is this? White Plain Pie.
That's so good. My favorite aspect of him as that guy is he always goes out of his way to bring up his gun and to show his gun. Yeah. And everybody always is like, oh my God. Like, and he always instantly downplays it and says, not a big deal. 20 years of service, never used it. But he always makes sure to interject it into the conversation and then say, it's not a big deal.
I love that movie. And that's definitely one of my favorite Clooney rules. Speaking of Clooney and Tarantino, I just watched this clip with Clooney. And he's doing a Tarantino. He's recanting a story about Tarantino, like from Dusk Till Dawn when they did that movie. Mm-hmm. So Robert Rodriguez directed that, and I think Tarantino produced it and whatever. And it's George Clooney doing an impression of Tarantino. He's telling a story about, and then they show the actual clip, and he's like, when Quentin came to me with Dusk Till Dawn, he comes to me with Robert Rodriguez, and he's like, all right, man, so like I was watching like ER one day, man, right? And like Robert Rodriguez says, he's like, hey man, you look like Quentin, or you look like George Clooney. You two could be brothers. And Clooney's like, okay. And then they showed the clip of the actual like MTV interview where Clooney is sitting there at the time and Tarantino is telling that story. He's like, yeah, I was like saw him on a magazine and like Robert was like, you guys look alike, you should be brothers. And Clooney just puts his head down like in the interview. That's really funny. But Yeah. What were we talking about? Oh, like Tarantino. One of the things so instead of watching movies, I watched a lot of like analysis of him and stuff like that, and I watched a little bit of stuff on the new movie he's working on, the film critic. One of the things that like sticks out is he novelized movies. He he's obviously blends a lot of different genres of films and takes from different films, but he also blends in different mediums. Like, I mean, the Inglourious Bastards is literally just in chapters, and Pulp Fiction really is in chapters,
Yeah.
I really love how he lets his scenes breathe with like like especially after however many decades of mobster movies. You then, with Tarantino, you got to see like, this is kind of like the novelization aspect of what he does. You got to see like what the minutia and day-to-day life of what these street hoodlums were.
Yeah.
And
that's a good
they're
point.
talking at a coffee shop in Reservoir Dogs about, pop culture and like
Tipping.
Yeah, tipping, what a foot massage is, like what it really means if it's the same thing as going down on a girl. And that was pretty revolutionary,
Yeah. Yeah. Have you seen Good, Bad, and the Ugly?
Oh, yeah.
And just, I that was another one that I hadn't seen until someone wanted to do it on my podcast. But it was wild to watch that and be like, oh, I've heard that Tarantino, borrows from this style, but it is crazy, to see that, because it is like watching a very early version of a Tarantino movie or something.
What he also does that's interesting is he takes kind of like B movie stories.
Yeah.
Like and not and like traditional ones like the Pulp Fiction is like, go the mobster boss says to the low underling mobster, take my wife out on the night on the town, just good friendly company. And that, I mean, there's so many, that's an archetypical story, and what he does is he takes those kind of archetypical, like what used to be in like B movies or whatever, or like blaxploitation he does with Jackie Brown, whatever, and then gives them this like cinematic, artistic, independent feel of the modern day. And like a lot of the movies that he is into, like the B movies, I probably wouldn't really be that into
But
them.
then you like his movies.
Yeah, and then it makes me sometimes go back and watch like movies that he, like Truffaut movies or whatever that he was like inspired by, and then I'm like kind of like what you were just saying, you're like you probably didn't like Good, the Bad, and the Ugly as much as you liked Tarantino movie X, Y, or Z, or maybe you did.
Yeah, most likely.
But you went you watched that because of a podcast.
Yeah, I watched that because
I watched one of those movies one time because I think it was Hateful Eight or something.
You know what I think is a good example of what you're saying though is like Once Upon a Time in Hollywood is something that would make me want to go back and watch old shows and old movies.
Yes.
That's I think a good example of that.
Yeah.
Like how much nostalgia I have for a time that I didn't even live in.
Right.
Like an NBC going off the air or whatever it is, seeing those old broadcasts. Or I remember right after I saw Once Upon a Time in Hollywood trying to get on YouTube to find like 70s radio, broadcast, because it was such a comforting thing when Brad's driving around and you have that in the background, like, KTFB or what, whatever it is, like the little jingle.
Yeah.
So I think that's a good example of.
And that the guy, all right, we're rocking all night. That guy, the DJ guy, I forget his name, but he was like a nationally syndicated DJ who was super popular in LA. And yeah, it does. It makes you want, like we talked about that with Once Upon a Time. It makes you nostalgic for something that we didn't really experience.
Yeah.
And he's so good at that because of like the detail that he has.
Yeah, and I think, it's embarrassing that I guess I didn't really think about this, but so do you think basically what happened, and I'm sure there's an interview out here where he either confirms or doesn't confirm this, but that Tarantino grew up watching all these quote unquote, what most people would consider like shitty movies, shitty, bad B movies.
Yeah.
And as a kid, he loved them. So then they had a deep impact on him where he, I think a lot of times if you love a movie as a kid, even if it's crap, when you get older, it kind of stays like you have this admiration for it.
Oh, yeah.
So then he gets to a place where kind of what is some of his bread and butter is, like you were saying, bringing that B movie or what a lot of people would think is a shitty movie into elevating it, making it a high quality
movie. He kind of blends stuff with like those kinds of movies with like French New Wave cinema and like techniques from French New Wave and stuff like that. So he gives those kinds of movies, like we were saying, this like he takes like a B story of a mobster and makes it like an Oscar movie.
Yeah,
you know?
yeah.
And he also personalizes movies in these very veiled ways. Like, he's talked about that in interviews. It's just like, you know, like a lot of these revenge plots. You know, he's not explicitly being like, oh, this is what I went through, but like this character is representing something I've gone through in life. And so I think that's why there is probably that very subtle added element to what he does, is that even though they're not personal in the sense that like they're direct, you know, they're layered in metaphor and whatever, but they are things that he is going through in life. And I think Once Upon a Time in Hollywood exemplifies that, because like Once Upon a Time in Hollywood harkens back to the day of when these cowboy people who were, I mean, that was the, you know, that was like...
Keep talking, I'm going to check one thing.
Yeah.
You said the cowboy people.
Yeah, the cowboy actor guys, you know, that was like... That was that was how it was in that day. I mean, there were lots of cowboy shows, you know.
Yeah.
And then there was a paradigm shift in society, and then there was a trend, and like, you know, Once Upon a Time in Hollywood is about one of these guys kind of being lost in that. And I think at that time, he is that guy, like, you know, because he talks a lot about, and I watched a lot of stuff about the state of modern cinema compared to when he was coming up and trying to just be like this independent filmmaker in the spirit of an independent filmmaker. Now film is so corporatized, and we'll see what happens. I think that'll change after the strike, actually. But, you know, he's going through that changing of the guard in Hollywood, and so is Rick, and so is Cliff.
Yeah, I think it's hard to not make something and not, you know, if you're going all out on it and not put something personal that's going on with you. Like no matter what my subject matter is, at some point of something I'm making, at some point I'm gonna feel pulled to, because that's what's gonna become interesting to you about the story, you know. So then you're gonna end up at some point, I'm not saying it has to be a monologue, but you're gonna write some dialogue or something that is something that feels like it's really coming from your gut, you know.
He has what is I found out is interesting about him that I really relate to a lot is that his writing started from being in acting classes and like taking monologues and stuff from scripts and parts of movies and TV shows and adding little bits in here and there. And that's kind of how he developed his writing style, from like, what would, you know, how would this look performed by two actors, you know? What were you saying? Where were we going with that?
I was just saying that you're always going to put something personal into whatever you're making.
Yeah, I forget what. Oh, so he was saying in acting class he learned about how, like, you don't deny anything that's happening in your life. You accept everything and deny nothing. Like, I think he uses a specific example. He's like, you know, if I'm on the way to the theater and, you know, I find out, like, I don't know, like you hit a dog or something or your girlfriend breaks up with you. I forget what the example was. Is like, you can't like not allow that to come into your performance, even if that's not what your character is dealing with. You have to allow that to be a part of your performance. Otherwise, you're denying this part of your consciousness and being, and then you're fighting these two things, like who you are and the character and blah blah blah. And so he applies that to writing. You know, like, whatever happened to him that day or whatever he's going through at that moment, he is, you know, consciously and subconsciously aware of the fact that that is like affecting his writing.
That's really interesting, because it's like, I wonder if the reason that he says that is because there is some kind of authenticity or something that could come out of you in that moment that you won't be able to get back.
Also, I think it's very difficult to deny what you're going through and then also create things. Yeah. You know, to pretend, like, to compartmentalize to such a degree, like, I think that's just the nature of art. You have to bring who you are to the stage that day, to the set, and to the page, writing it down. You know. Yeah.
Does it ever bother you? I feel like your answer might be no, because I think you are I do like Tarantino, but I definitely think you're a bigger fan than me. Does it ever feel like, whenever he has those scenes where characters are just kind of, they might be doing something, but they're just kind of talking about maybe even a small thing, and it's kind of like a humorous back and forth or whatever. Do you ever feel like, okay, let's get on with it?
The one scene like that I don't like is the scene in Django when they're all doing the gag with the hoods, the KK,
Oh,
and Jonah
yeah,
Hill
uh-huh,
pops in, and it's like, oh, now we've got a famous person.
Yeah.
That's there. I feel like he started to indulge that more like later on, whereas like the scene in Reservoir Dogs where they're talking about Madonna, that feels like a fairly authentic moment that I'm intrigued by. You know, not fairly. That if I'm like, oh, I'm now sitting at a table with a bunch of mobsters, and this is what they talk about, and you know, whereas like that scene in Django where it's like the thing with the hoods, I'm like, I don't know, this is like a gag that is gone. It wasn't for me. But I'm aware of like Tarantino criticisms, and I don't like necessarily disagree with them.
I guess, because my question would be,
some I do, some
and I think I might have and I think I have an opinion on this, but I'm not even quite sure what it is. But do you think like okay, what would you say it is if you had to get analytical and technical about it? What would you say it is that when he does scenes like that, they work? Whereas I feel like if the vast majority of people, if some no-name person tried to do a scene like that, most people are going to be like, okay, bro, fuck off. Get cut to the next scene.
One thing is that those scenes they may seem like they're disparate from the like plot or story or whatever, but he's often burying like important details in minutia, in seeming minutia that does come back later.
That makes sense.
You know, so I don't think like with him, it's not necessarily like, I can't think of a scene where it's like, you know, like, oh, that had nothing to do with anything that we've experienced. You know what I mean? Like, I'm trying to think of like an example, because I've heard him actually say that in an interview.
What, that they always have a lot of stuff?
Yeah, that he buries like important details in minutia.
Yeah, because I think I start to think, again, if you put me on a lie detector test, you'd probably be angry with me for how little I've seen his movies, like especially on repeat watches.
I don't care.
Like I think I've only watched Inglourious from start to finish once.
Oh.
Now that'd be funny to go. Now I know I said I wouldn't care.
Yeah.
But
well, yeah. I was like, I won't be disappointed, and then I immediately am disappointed.
Okay, well, this is...
It's like, well,
But-
we're clearly not on the same page here.
But I remember watching it. I think
Actually-
around the time that it came out, like, you know, let's say it's a year after it came out. So at that time,
2009, I think.
so I was 18-ish, somewhere around there, and like this for me, the scene where they're in the bar and they have the whiskey and there's all that suspense and then it ends in the big shootout. I guess just in the moment, I remember thinking to myself when I was way less invested in film than I am now, being like, this is just going on way too long. Like, and do you feel like there's any credence to that? Or do you feel like every second of that scene is basically like perfect?
That's one of my favorite scenes in any movie.
I mean, yeah, I hear you.
I mean, the tri-glaze, or the tri-glazes.
Yeah.
First of all, it's the first time I saw Michael Fassbender, and Michael Fassbender became one of my favorite actors. I love that scene. What part of it do you think is just going on too much, like the card game and stuff like that? Or
yeah, you know, it's weird. I think there's a lot of subconscious stuff that happens that either keeps us engaged or doesn't. Because I would say, you know, not that much longer, I saw a movie like Drive for the first time, and I walked out of that movie theater like mind blown. And that movie has a landslide of criticisms of people being like, why do they take so long before they talk? And why is there this and why is there that? It's so dumb. Like, I think that's a very polarizing movie where even though it has, you know, good critic scores, I think audience wise, it's like 50-50. You either love it or hate it.
Well, all right, that scene, for example, the first part of that scene is a lot of them celebrating that guy, Max, who just had, or maybe his son's name is Max. The guy who's just about the Nazi soldier who just had a kid, right?
Yeah.
Well, you know, they're laughing and celebrating and they're like having this very human moment and stuff. And that is crucial to how that guy is going to be in the standoff with Brad Pitt.
Yeah.
You know, like that adds so much more weight to it that he, you know, he just wants to go see his kid. And now we've taken a Nazi and humanized him
him.
to such a
Yeah.
degree. It's just like, this is just a guy who just wants to make it home to see his kid. He doesn't
Yeah.
want to be here.
Yeah.
You know, he's just here doing what he was ordered to do. And I mean, so you could say, oh, why are we watching? Who gives a shit about this Genghis Khan, Godzilla, or King Kong shit? And it's like, well, I mean, you're getting a sense of like, that's adding to the camaraderie of what's happened. And this guy isn't such just an evil guy. He's look at everyone laughing and having a good time. And then you're also getting to see like a card game of the day and like the cultural markers of the day and the pop culture figures of the day and who was in the zeitgeist at the time and stuff like that. You know, so I can't really think besides that one, which I just don't. To me, it's just not funny to me. I get why people think it's funny, but that scene in Django with the hoods, I think that just goes on way too long, and it's just.
It kind of feels like.
But other than that, I don't have. There's not a lot of them where if like someone was like, "Oh yeah," in this scene, and then I'd be like, "All right, well, let's really talk about that scene," and blah blah blah, and then I'd be like, I think depending on the scene, I could a lot of times find how that is relevant to later in the movie, or like the whole like you could maybe like one of my favorite scenes, even though it's not one of my favorite movies of his, is at the end of Kill Bill 2, where he's describing where Bill is talking about the ideology of Superman.
Yeah,
and to me that's fascinating.
Yeah,
and it like is relevant to what's going on.
Well, it's also it's also like, you know, Once Upon a Time is another example where I think that's the one of his movies that I've honestly probably seen the most. And that's one where there are a lot of scenes that I think on the surface could feel like, oh, they're maybe not contributing to the story so much or whatever, but I find them super engaging and stuff. And the more I watch it, the more I enjoy it. So I think when I was a younger lad, I think the attention span is not the same. And it's maybe also feels different from other movies where it's kind of like very much point A, point B, point A, point B, scene to scene.
True. And then also you develop a whole other appreciation for movies when you go to like in your film school or acting classes, or like you start to read screenwriting books and you start to like get into what we're doing, and like you understand what delineates a good film from a film that's not good, you know? And like, of course, things are subjective and stuff like that, but like storytelling does have tenets to it that you know you do start to notice when you get older, or when you after you've done that kind of stuff. So maybe that's also part of it.
I think Tarantino is well, obviously he is talented, but I kind of didn't want to say that because I didn't want to like discredit how hard I think he's worked and how much shit he's watched to become who he is. Because I don't think he's just some natural born genius. I think he's obsessive about movies, and that has led to his insane wisdom and talent. But there's a fucking point to that.
Well, the thing with Tarantino is that let me.
I really want. It's like the two hosts of the show and the one guy who just comes in and he goes, "Well, here's the thing about that," and then he goes, "Hold on, what was I? Fuck." And then the other guy goes,
"I'll just swoop in here.
Yeah, I'll pick up.
I'll swoop in here."
You know.
So Tarantino, the reason why a big impetus of why he is the way he is that like he describes that. I believe his stepdad and his mom. So this book I should have brought. Shit. So it's his book that he wrote after,
And we would have read it live.
Yeah, we would have read it. I would have been reading. We just would have sat here and read it and analyzed it on the spot.
Didn't Andy Kaufman used to do a bit like that, where I think he would literally go on stage and just read.
He used to
just read a book.
Yeah,
and it was after he had gotten like a crazy following.
Yeah.
So all these people were obsessed with his comedy. So then these people buy tickets, and then he's fascinated with the idea of what's going to happen if I just go out there and I don't do comedy and I just read this thing.
Yeah, he was a wild guy, man.
That's crazy.
A performance artist.
I think they say that he was more fascinated with the idea of leaving his audience dumbfounded than he was entertaining them. Yeah.
Yeah, I could see that.
Yeah.
His whole wrestling arc kind of indicates that.
So wild. Anyway, I interrupted.
Oh yeah, so Tarantino, his dad and his stepdad and his mom would go to movies a lot. Like he lived in LA and blah blah blah. And the guys trying to date his mom would take him out to movies to like get in good with his mom and stuff like that. So a big part of his like idea of what intelligence is, he even said like one time his stepdad was, or a bunch of times his dad would be watching TV with him, and he'd be like, "Oh, that's Bill so and so from the show Howdy Doody, and that's that actor, he was on Bonanza, and this guy was from the show Maverick." And so when Tarantino was a little kid, he was like, "Oh my God, my stepdad's a genius. He knows like everybody who's ever been in a movie." So then he started being that way. And then when he was allowed to go to movies with the adults, it felt like this extra special thing with him, because as long as he could kind of hang with the adults and behave and like, pick up on the things that they picked up on, he could go, instead of getting stuck with a babysitter, he could go with them to the movies as long as he could keep up, And so that's just where he developed that.
I wonder if people back in the day, probably, but like what you just said about his stepdad knowing this guy's from this and this guy's from that and that girl's from that. I wonder if people back in the day, if that stepdad, for example, was like a movie buff, or if that was a more common thing back in the day.
I remember my dad being, I think it was just a more common thing for people to have joint cultural entertainment experiences. Because there was only
there
few
wasn't
channels.
as much.
Right. You had no internet or YouTube or anything like that. Whereas now it's like, someone could be like, "Oh yeah, I'm watching Billions right now. Have you seen it?" And you could be like, "No, I mean, I get home from work and I watch videos about a guy like shaving a cow's hoof."
Like I don't watch movies. I don't watch shows.
Yeah, I watch
sports. I mean, I guess there were sports.
Well,
but
you can
there's
be
just
super
way more.
specific now.
There's way more to spread. That's
Right.
not just different types of movies.
Right.
It's just everything.
Whereas if there was a big cultural event on TV, it would get a rating. 40 million people would watch it. I mean, there was TV shows that would get 30, 40 million people watching on a weekly basis. Now, if you get 2 million people to watch your show, you're like a hit on television.
Yeah.
So I think that was just like a way more common thing in the day, where people just kind of knew who the actors of the day were. This TV show, more people watched this TV show. Like more people just, like I said, had shared communal like entertainment experiences.
I'm trying to think if I feel like people watch less movies in general.
I mean, I think people go to the theaters less for sure.
Well, definitely, but I was gonna say, I also feel like people watch less movies in general, but then I don't know, because there's so much on streaming that it's so easy that I think people watch it. But I do think people watch less movies, because I think a lot of people, like my mom, for example, doesn't watch that many movies. She watches a lot of reality TV and news shows and just other stuff like a talk show or something. You know what I mean? Or maybe my family is specific in that way, in that there's not as many people that are super into movies.
I think back in the day, it seemed to me like when I was a kid and stuff like that, and before that, from what I've gathered, is that people did watch more of the same things, and it was more, the culture had less things to reference from. Just sheer numbers.
But yeah, and you can even think back to not that long ago. It's like a movie comes out, and again, I'm referencing my parents, so maybe it's different. Maybe I'm just referencing that my parents watch less movies. But I guess if I think back to take a movie that was a big deal, but not even like the biggest thing of all time, but like You've Got Mail, for whatever reason, is what's coming to my mind. I remember when that came out, and me being a kid and walking in on my mom watching it from Blockbuster or whatever, and that was a big thing because they had already done Sleepless in Seattle. And it was like Sleepless in Seattle was a big deal. Yeah. And I remember my mom watching it and being like, "Oh, it's good. It's not, this is her opinion, but it's not as good as their other one together." But it was like a thing, like everyone's going to go see You've Got Mail because everyone loved Tom Hanks and Meg Ryan. So I'm going to go see it.
Yeah. Or everyone would go see the Arnold Schwarzenegger movie, or everyone would go see the big Sly Stallone movie on a smaller level. Every year you'd have a group of intellectual New York people go see the Woody Allen movie that came out every year. Like movies, I think were just. I mean, my buddy and I have talked about this. Who I'm going to be on his. I'm going to be on his.
Don't
shoot
promote
tomorrow.
Other stuff on our show.
Okay, damn. Okay.
I'm joking. Don't ever let that happen again.
That's cool, but don't ever. Don't ever cross promote on this channel. All right, we're good.
Our fan base is not here for that.
We're not here to prostitute ourselves.
For you to come into my home.
That'd be funny if you're like, yeah, we're gonna have to stop rolling. We're just gonna have to address this.
I just pull one of these.
Yeah. Can we cut this real quick?
I don't. Starting and stopping, like a lot is really funny. Like silence and just kind of staring off to show anger is one of my favorite choices. Like I've never even seen the movie, but I remember thinking it was so brilliant in that trailer of War Dogs with Jonah Hill and Miles Teller.
Yeah.
And they're like trying to sell something and they settle for like $1 million.
Yeah.
And it's some kind of situation where they have like a valuable weapon and they basically sell it for $1 million. And then right after it happens, the judge says like, so this thing is valued at like 40 million or something and you could have gotten like way more. And it's like as soon as he says 40 million, like Jonah Hill, he doesn't say anything. He's just like,
yeah.
And it's just like the itching of the eye. Like taking that silence to just acknowledge something before you explode is so funny.
Oh, it's yes. You know, it reminded me of this hack. There's someone I was reading these like psychological hacks that you can do to people.
Okay.
And basically, if someone says something you don't like or disagree with, you just stare at the middle of their forehead in this puzzled way, and you just don't. And no, after 2 seconds of that, anybody is going to be like start backtracking.
Yeah.
You know.
That is funny.
Anyway,
but the point I was making is now, like a movie like Dunkirk, say it comes out and it's made good money, but I could ask someone, "Have you seen Dunkirk?" And you've got mail. It's like, "Oh, I haven't seen it, but I will," you know, or I've seen it. Whereas Dunkirk, it's like, "Oh no, didn't see it." You know, it's whether it's 50-50. Maybe
our
you saw
culture
it,
has
maybe you
changed. You know, movies are just not as widely important to people culturally.
Yeah.
You know, they're just not the things that we necessarily do to communicate with each other as much anymore.
Is it possible it's just because you have all these other things at your fingertips? Like say maybe movies are as important, but maybe I don't feel the need to go out and see the new movie because I have an endless string of movies available at all times.
Yeah. I mean, I think it's just sheer economics. You know, the market is flooded with something. I think once that definitely devalued a movie when people's concept.
That's a good point.
When people's conception of a movie was something you have to go to a grand.
It's like printing cash.
Yeah, well,
like the more you have, the less value one has.
Well, in the consciousness of society at one time, a movie was this thing where you go to the theater, the movie house, the cinema house. Yeah, and it's a big thing on a giant screen, and oh my god, like that's the top artists of the day are doing it, and like that's not really what it is now. Now it's like, oh, I'm watching a movie on the plane. Yeah. Who's this guy? Oh, yeah. Is that the girl from blah, blah, blah?
Yeah.
Who's she dating? And yeah. It's not like, this is not, everyone has this. Everyone can just whip this out at any time. And when you can now, when in people's minds, when there's no differentiation between this app that I can just do this with and watch whatever and going to the cinema, I mean, I just think that inevitably that's going to be devalued.
Yeah, it is wild. I don't know what the answer is to bring the value of movies back, because it's also like if you do something that gives people less opportunity or access on streaming or something along those lines, it's like that's just going to piss everyone off. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I mean,
but it feels like it would be necessary to increase the value of a movie theater again.
Well, for me, do you have AMC Plus? Not that I'm doing a promotion, but do you have AMC Plus?
No.
I don't know why more people don't have that. It's literally like I think it's $23 a month or something in LA. It depends on the market you're in. You can go see 3 movies a week at AMC.
Damn.
For $24 a month.
Yeah.
So, I mean, how often do you see 12 movies in a month at the theater? But, I mean, if you go to one
when
IMAX
the first
movie,
Tobey Maguire Spider-Man came out, that might have been the only time
that you saw a movie 12 times.
That's hands down the movie I've seen in theaters the most.
Yeah.
I was in like 7th grade. I walked out and I was like, that's the best movie I've ever seen in my life. And then I probably saw it 10 times in theaters.
7th grade.
Somewhere around there, 6th or 7th grade.
Is that, I wouldn't know. Is that better than I'm sure it's better than the newer ones, right?
I mean, I thought the first Tom Holland one, I was like, like every other Marvel movie. I thought the second one was good, mostly because of Jake Gyllenhaal. Have you seen it?
I've seen some of that where he's the bad guy, Jake.
Yeah, his performance is like hilarious and just awesome in that.
Yeah.
And I was like, and it's better than the first one. And then the third one I thought was pretty amazing, honestly.
Okay.
But I mean, one of the reasons I thought it was amazing was because they bring in Toby and all this stuff. But for me, it wasn't just the fanfare. If you watch that movie, one of my biggest complaints about Marvel in general, but also specifically the Tom Holland one, is like the first one, it feels like there's zero stakes the whole time. There's like some good humor and there cute bits and stuff, but it's like it never feels dangerous or anything. And then the third one gets like dark, the stakes feel high as shit. And, you know, not to ruin it for people who haven't seen it, but fuck off. It's been out for like 3 years. It even ends on a note that it's not just like a cliffhanger. It ends where it's not just like happy-go-lucky ending.
Oh, okay.
So I think the third one was really good. But I think just at the time, the reason that one felt so revolutionary, first of all, I was a kid. I mean, I'm sure if I was 20 something, I wouldn't have been nearly as mind blown. But you're in 7th grade. My cousin asked me to go. It's like, oh yeah, you know, we'll go see it, but it's probably not going to be very good. And then it was actually just a ton of fun and like great action and stuff. And then you walk out and it's like, to that point, in my opinion, no superhero movie had achieved that level of actually being a solid movie. It was like they were always kind of a joke, whereas that one I do feel like took itself seriously and was well acted, you know, next level effects for the time, you know, and it was just fucking awesome.
Well, I think the Marvel is a big reason why the movie model is where it is. I think after the strike, things are going to change a lot. I don't think it's really sustainable anymore for a movie to cost $300 or $400 million to make and make $100 million, $200 million, and people be like, "Oh wow, this is great." And it's like, well, sure, it made $250 million, but it costs $300 million, and it costs another however much, $100 million plus to promote it, and it's like. That model was working for a little while because you could spend however hundreds of millions on a film and make $1 billion or make $1 billion plus, but people are not clamoring to go see that stuff anymore. And I mean, I got exhausted with it a long time ago, and this is something relevant to Tarantino's dealing with now because he got so much backlash from people.
About what?
About
I'm not saying he hasn't gotten
Marvel
backlash in general, but
and like
he talked shit on it.
The actors are not the stars, and people got upset about that. And then Chris Evans came out and he's like, "Yeah, actually, looking back on it, like making Captain America, it is way more about Captain America than it was ever about me. You know, like the superhero is the star." And Anthony Mackie has talked about this at some Comic-Con thing. He's like, there's so many factors into why the movie has been devalued. Like, but part of it is that we don't have movie stars really anymore.
Yeah.
You don't have someone like a Stallone or a Schwarzenegger where it's like, oh man, Total Recall, it's going to make so much money because it's just Schwarzenegger. Like The Rock had that going on for a while, but that's not where he's at anymore. And I mean, I don't know who's like a star in the sense that's like you have to go see this person's movie.
Well, the other thing that I'll say that I think is an interesting dynamic of it, this is definitely not the only factor that plays into that.
Yeah.
But when you think about the people that are still stars, you know, have that star quality, I think something that does contribute to it is that the vast majority of them are not, they're either non-existent or not as present on social media.
Well, they're also stars from the era, from a different era.
True.
So you're kind of like, you're given kind of this grandfathered in special status that is impossible to achieve now.
But I would still argue that if you had someone, I don't know, I want to say Timothée Chalamet, but let me just use him. I know we've talked before about how he's different and stuff from like the old school stars, but I would almost argue that I don't even know what his Instagram is or if he's on it, but I feel like if you didn't see Chalamet like in as many YouTube interviews or on Instagram and all those things, there is like an added level of mystique of driving up the demand. It makes them more interesting. Like Leo's not present on Instagram. No. Like, I don't know if Brad Pitt is, but I know if he is on it, it's not like just talking to the camera, producing content regularly like The Rock does.
Yeah. Well,
you know?
It's like the entertainment has been devalued. It just economically, we flooded the market with it. Mm-hmm. Therefore, its value on an individual level goes down.
Yeah.
A movie now, what used to be what we described, maybe think about like going to a drive-in movie, what kind of an experience that is. That is now...
Well, depending on the company.
That shit could be a nightmare.
Could also be a dream.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah. We're going to have to pause again. No, that's the same thing as going on Netflix and being like, oh, there's Jessica Chastain and Ryan Reynolds and blah, 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 blah right here on Netflix because it's Friday and Netflix sometimes releases a movie on Friday and You know, sometimes they don't. And
Yeah.
sometimes it's a big movie, sometimes it's not, but it's mixed in here with a documentary about turtles and, you know, a cake show. Is this a computer or a cake show? You know, is it cake? Have you seen that?
That's a whole show. I've seen like
Oh
TikTok.
yeah, it's like an inanimate object. It's like, oh, this
But-
microphone. Is it a microphone or a cake?
Hold on.
Everybody,
But I've seen.
that's the show.
So I've seen like TikToks, you know, that'll do something like that. But
No, that's a show.
But I didn't realize that was a whole show.
That's one of many shows on Netflix about
wild.
baking a cake and whether this is a notebook or a cake, and like you have to judges determine. It's insane.
There's always been dumb shows though. Like I remember there was a show at one point. It was probably the early 2000s that was just called "Are You Hot?" and it was just a guy. The guys were always wearing the same thing, and I think the girls were always wearing the same thing. I don't remember what the girls were wearing genuinely, but I remember the guys. They're all just wearing blue jeans and no shirt, and they just walk onto the stage, and then you have 3 judges that give you a score out of 10, and then that decides if you're hot or not, and then you go on to the next round.
So that show is right next to fucking network on your streaming service. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So it's like Fuckboy Island is right in there with like
And
Lawrence of Arabia.
I think, unfortunately, I don't know. I wonder what does more numbers for Netflix. I guess
Movies or the other stuff.
I guess I was gonna say I gotta think movies because it feels like that's more promoted. But then I'm like, I don't know. I think for me it's more promoted because I watch more movies. But I don't know if everyone's homepage looks the same. I mean, I know they don't. But for me, whenever I open it up, it's a bunch of classic movies and stuff is what's there.
Yeah, that's you.
Yeah. And so for other people, they might open it and the first thing that's up there is Love Island or whatever the shit, you know.
Yeah, for sure. Too Hot to Handle. You're not familiar with Too Hot to Handle? Oh, another good one. It's the premise of what you said. Are You Hot? Is the name? Yeah, that's every show, every dating show. F-Boy Island, Too Hot to Handle.
Hold on, is that a real thing? F-Boy Island?
Yes.
Is it F-Boy? It doesn't say fuck.
No, it does. I think it says F-Boy, but yeah,
That's pretty funny.
Yeah, that's a show, F-Boy Island.
That is funny.
And the young lady has to suss out who the F-boys are and who the good guys are. Yeah.
Do you watch this with your wife?
Does
she like this stuff?
No, she sometimes do. We haven't watched something like this in a very long time. We did watch a few episodes of season 1 of F-Boy Island. And I think we did watch a bit of Too Hot to Handle. It's all utter nonsense.
It feels
is what I'm saying.
It feels like
it's
the
mixed
plot,
in with art films.
The plot twist with F-Boy Island to me feels like plot twist. They're all F-boys. They're all on here trying to get attention, and they're all here.
Here's the thing about F-Boy Island: they're either openly F-boys or they're pretending to be nice guys because they want to fuck you.
Yeah, exactly.
So they're F-boys.
Yeah,
just
exactly.
covering up.
So Tarantino. Now I think you've said before that Once Upon a Time in Hollywood is your favorite Tarantino movie.
Probably. I mean, I really like Inglourious Bastards a lot.
Is that definitely your number
Pulp
2?
Fiction. No, I would say Pulp Fiction, Inglourious Bastards, Once Upon a Time in Hollywood, and then I would say Jackie Brown is right there, and then it's like Django and Hateful Eight are around there with like Kill Bill, and then Reservoir Dogs is probably actually up there with Jackie Brown. I don't know. After it's like I like all of his movies. I love all of his movies a lot. But yeah, I would say Once Upon a Time in Hollywood, Pulp Fiction, and Inglourious Bastards would be my top 3. But Jackie Brown might be right up in there too.
I see.
Jackie Brown was great to me because it was like the first time you got to see like, you know, like the mobster movies of the Italian mobster movies of the 70s and stuff. These were like the most prestigious, pristine, you know, gangsters. And then, you know, Robert De Niro's just like getting high.
Yeah.
And Samuel Jackson's like trying to get, what's his name? Lewis. He's like, Lewis. When he's like on the phone, he's like, Lewis, good? And he's like, oh yeah. And he just doesn't know how to put down the phone. He's so hot. It's like you got to see like dumbfounded, like low level criminals doing every day, doing their thing, which you never really got to see before.
Yeah. Once Upon a Time is probably one. But I know this, before Once Upon a Time came out, I had always watched Tarantino movies. Like I was aware of basically all of his movies and had seen most of them. And I remember I hadn't seen Pulp, and I assumed that Pulp was like, I think what happens with a lot of people, well, a lot of famous filmmakers especially, is that everyone just looks at like their earlier stuff and kind of says like, oh, that was the best. And I was like, I'm probably going to watch it and not think it's that good because it's from the 90s and stuff. And not that anything in the 90s was bad, but I'm just going to like, it's going to be dated and it's not going to be as good as some of his more modern stuff. And when I watched it immediately, I was like, that is by far my favorite of his movies.
Pulp Fiction, yeah.
But I think now, I don't know, I would need to watch them back to back. I haven't watched Pulp in a while,
the thing of it is that Pulp Fiction was that for so long. And it's just such like the obvious answer. But it's a genuine. There's a reason why it's the obvious answer. It's like pretty close to, people talk about like what a perfect movie is, and I've heard that in the discussion. And then there's scenes where they're talking about minutia and that, but it's all
well. That's what I was going to say. That's probably the first time in his movies where I saw one of his movies for the first time, and I was locked in and engaged the entire time. And I was like, this movie, I feel like that movie to me felt to me what I think a lot of big Tarantino fans feel with most of his movies, if that makes sense. Like whenever my mind would kind of wander in some of those long drawn out scenes in some of his other movies, Pulp, the Royale with cheese, all that stuff, like I was just in the whole time.
Well, like the foot massage versus going down on the girl conversation is relevant to that because it's what precipitated whatever happened to that mobster that's in question and what Marcellus did to him.
Yeah.
And now Vincent is going to now have to go out on a date with her, keep this Uma Thurman, keep her company and stuff. So it's very relevant because it shows them where their moral grounds are, and then John Travolta is later going to be in this high stakes situation with Uma Thurman.
Yeah. And
so it's relevant. It comes back to be relevant.
Yeah. But I think there's another element to it other than just if it comes back later, because I think there is something to be said about being engaging in the moment. And I'm not saying that I'm right or something, that those other movies weren't engaging. What I'm saying is I think there is something, whether it was the time in my life or that movie, that maybe does lead to so many people saying it's their favorite of his, where like even in the moment, even if you don't know that it's going to come back, just the scene itself had me locked in, without even thinking it, just on the broadest generic level of it, it did just entertain me basically every second of the movie. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Which, I mean, his movies, a lot of them are all good scenes.
Yeah.
Like there's not boring scenes. There's not throwaway scenes. It's like they're long, like the opening scene of Inglourious Basterds is long. I think it's maybe like 20 minutes or something or more.
Yeah.
But that to me is a great scene.
Yeah, I agree
You
with that.
learn so much about this guy. It's interesting. I wonder how many movies where the antagonist is introduced first. Because he's introduced before Brad Pitt and the Bastards are.
That makes sense.
It's like this is what the Bastards are.
I feel like it definitely has happened. I feel like a lot of movies start with like the darkness of the movie and then kind of go into the normal everyday life that's lighter of the.
Yes, I had Inglourious Basterds on. Like I said, because I've seen it so many times, I wasn't like sitting down watching it, taking notes and stuff. But that is something I was like, oh, they introduced Landa first.
I mean, you know who he is, but like Dark Knight, the first scene is the Joker in that robbery, which is a fucking awesome opening scene. I feel like movies that have really great antagonists, I think a lot of times can start with that. It's like, let me show you how scary this shit is.
What we're up against.
And then we'll go into,
But like, just like, I don't know. There's so many great elements of that scene. It reminds me a lot of like the scene from True Romance with Clarence's dad, Sicilian, Sicily. Do you know? Do you know True Romance?
Not nearly as well as I know these other movies, but I do know it. But what I was gonna say is, it's just impossible to bring up True Romance without me instantly going to Gary Oldman. And like, do you watch Barry? Or have you watched Barry?
I have. Well, they do that in Barry.
That might be the hardest I've ever laughed at, like a show scene
where the kid from class
just because it starts. It starts with him being like, "Hey, can you be my scene partner?" And he's like, "Yeah, he's gonna be my scene partner." And then it cuts to Just smash cut to them on on stage, and he's got the dreadlocks, and he goes, "Grab a seat there, boy." And he's like, got everything from a Diddle I Joe to a damn if I know. And he does that laugh.
Yeah.
Like, I was laughing
see that scene
so hard. God, that was so funny.
That's a hilarious scene to do in a class. But yeah, well, actually, Tarantino, I think in an interview said that he's thought that like he had finally written something better than that scene when he wrote that Inglourious Basterds scene.
That's really cool.
Yeah.
I never heard that.
Yeah. So I think the and like those little characteristics that he gives his characters, like the how he partakes in whatever the finest beverage of the culture that he's visiting at the time, So he's on a dairy farm, so it's, and he always makes food look so like, I don't drink milk, but I'm like, that is a delicious glass of milk right there, And then later on with the he has a glass of Chianti when because they're pretending they're Italian.
Yeah.
And so he always has like the appropriate food or beverage of the moment. Like he has that French pastry that looks so delicious when he's talking with the girl who escaped Shoshana.
Yeah.
And he does that in all of his movies. Like in Django, there's the scene where Schultz and Django go to the speakeasy or whatever, and they have the beer, and he like shaves the top of the foam off with the knife. And I'm like, man, I could go for a beer. Right
Yeah. God. No, it's that is something that would be fun for us to dig into is what is it about the way he does things? Yeah, he makes everything, for lack of a better word, like sexy. Like even I've had Easy Mac.
Yeah.
Easy Mac is not that good.
Right.
But when Brad Pitt's making it, and even though he's in this dump, I think it's just the attention to detail, the way it's cut and edited, again, for lack of a better word, but like the ASMR of it, of him making it and stuff, the sound of the powder hitting the pan and stuff. And again, even though it's like this gross pot, there is a comfort to it of like, oh, I wish I was just sitting on my couch watching old school TV, eating mac and cheese.
Or like when they have a beer and a pizza together, it's like, he is very good at capturing the significance of food and culture, and he does that with his stories. Like there's something about like, I think also the thing that he does is that his passion is contagious. I think you could be someone who is like a so-so movie fan and watch him talk about movies and then watch one of his movies and be like, man, I'm pretty excited about movies. Yeah. And I think that's what he does, like those shots with food. It's like, man, that's not only a cool shot, but like, that's like, like my mouth is watering. It's scrumptious. I'm having like a visceral experience to this,
There's oddly something about, I don't know if it's pop culture or like commercialism or something, but like, he's not afraid to go into that stuff. Like he's not on some indie high horse. I guess what I'm saying is I think a lesser version of it would be if I'm watching Back to the Future and, a Spielberg movie, it was a huge movie. It had clearly a lot of sponsorships and shit like that. So they're eating dinner and there's a Pepsi can with the logo pointed directly at the thing. And it's like, oh yeah, I do like a Pepsi. Like, it's so dumb, but it is a thing that happens. And I just think Tarantino is like the overdrive version of that, where they talk about Big Mac for 10 minutes. You know what I mean? And then you're like, oh, I want to go get a Big Mac.
The burger, the Big Kahuna burger in Pulp Fiction.
Yeah, exactly.
And he's like, that is a tasty burger.
And it makes me feel like I want Big Kahuna to actually exist.
Yeah. I mean, food is so important to the human experience. It's so important to cultures. And I think that he captures that in his movies.
But I think it goes...
And it also says a lot about a character, what they drink, what their thing is,
Yeah. But also just... it's bigger than food, because it's like it's the same thing we were talking about with Once Upon a Time, where it's like, oh, I want to listen to old radio. I want to live in that time. And I don't even smoke. But whenever the guy's staying up till it's the night where, the murders are going to happen, and it's saying what everyone did, and the guy, it's like he rolled a big fat joint and he was watching American television and thinking about how much better it is than, is it Italian television? Polish television. Yeah. And it's like, yeah, I don't even smoke, but I wouldn't mind like having a joint and laying on the couch and watching late night, like it's 2 a.m. Yeah. I've got no reason to wake up early tomorrow, and I'm just watching.
Well, you talk about something right there, like with movies and culture. Like we were talking about how cultural value and how it's changed or diminished or whatever. The whole late night experience and how that tied into films. I mean, it used to be a thing like where a lot of people watched, whoever on Johnny Carson that night promote the big movie that's coming out on Friday, and that's not a thing anymore.
I mean, yeah, and it was a thing for a while where didn't have near the impact, but it's faded in all facets. Like, who gives a shit about who's going on Jimmy Fallon? Well, like it's still a thing. Like they still go on there and promote their stuff.
I mean, even
but
with
just no one cares, and it doesn't move the needle.
It doesn't move the needle like it used to. Like comedians talk about it all the time.
If you got on Carson, it was like
that was it.
Yeah,
it was NBC.
Now,
NBC was
Rogan.
calling the next day with but Rogan doesn't have the pull in mainstream. He doesn't have the pull in Hollywood.
Yeah, but
Rogan can't get you a TV. Well, Rogan. Being on Rogan, and if you're,
I'm trying to remember who it was. I'm trying to remember if it was.
You can get a Netflix special. And
there was
you can
someone
parlay that, but
there was someone. I remember he was on some interview. It might have been Tom Segura. Let's say it was Tom Segura. I don't remember if it was him specifically, but it was someone that is of that level of fame now.
Yeah.
And they asked him about like when did it change for you, and he said Rogan. He said when I went on Rogan for the first time, like. Overnight, everything changed.
I mean, podcasting and comedy he will change your life there.
Yeah,
but he can't get you into the next big movie. Whereas, like the Tonight Show, that could, if you were a comedian, get you onto a big show or movie or whatever, and that has no cachet anymore.
It's getting me all jazzed up. I kind of just wanted to talk for a minute about like, what is if Carson's not the thing anymore? What is the thing?
Rogan's the closest to it. It's
for movies, though.
For movies,
what would be the thing that would make studios be like, we got to get that guy?
I mean, I don't know how much I want to get into it, but I've told you about that idea I've had with tying in a podcast to like making quick film, making prompted films that have certain whatever criteria or whatever, and you kind of bring the independent filmmaking spirit to a podcast where like. The podcast audience is aware of the inner I don't know how much of the inner workings, but like I kind of got the idea because Kevin Smith, who I'm not necessarily the biggest fan of, I don't dislike him or anything, but he made a movie called Husk or something.
Okay.
And it was generated through enthusiasm based on what he just kind of a plot he threw out on a podcast. Right?
Yeah.
And I thought, well, what if you did that and then the movie got made?
Yeah.
It got funding and this, that, and the other, and he kind of worked it out on the podcast, talking about it, brainstorming. Yeah. I thought, well, what if you did that? What if that was the intention of a podcast? And then if that got very popular, you would have a vessel where it'd be like, oh, did you see those guys that were like UCLA students who had the short film that premiered on the film podcast?
Yeah.
And it's like maybe something like that where studio executives who, like they kind of are just like these cyborg type creatures who only see numbers and stuff like that. If it was like, well, this concept that maybe was like an art film or maybe kind of out there, or like Tarantino dealt with this a lot, where it's like, this is too much like a play, or this isn't really how a movie. But so like you take a concept that maybe would be hard to pitch, but then it's like, well, it got 100,000 views in this amount of time on the podcast. Netflix, Hulu, whoever would start greenlighting stuff like that.
Yeah.
So I don't think there is something that really exists right now where it's like I was on this show and then
it's like proof that you get views.
Right.
Not your content gets views even. It's like that you get views.
Right.
Because it's almost like you could be a YouTube creator that writes little shorts and like does your thing and they do big views. And I guess maybe that would get you some attention, but it's almost like, does your face get views?
Yeah.
Okay, then that we know. Like your face does views. Let's go put your face on Netflix.
Yeah, for sure. And for sure that happens with independent films because they have to get people to pay attention.
Yeah.
So that definitely is a thing. But yeah, I think all of these kinds of things like lead to where we are with movies. And I'm trying to think like, yeah, I don't think there's like what pops a movie off now. I guess festivals still, like big festivals still do that to some degree.
I feel like who gives it? Me personally, no disrespect to anybody out there or to you I could not give a fuck about a festival these days.
I mean,
but I think it's in the same way that I don't give a shit about awards.
No.
Like I've just lost all respect. Well, and they've lost all respect and credibility basically from me.
And that's why I think
you won Sundance, like don't care. You probably suck. Like,
well, you won Sundance, but your film obviously had
we know
the same political markers. It's not like Tarantino talked about again. It's just like on Rogan, I think he talked about how the ideology supersedes pretty much everything.
Yeah,
and that whatever And I do think that corporate people kind of want entertainment to get to a point where it's just like you throw in the buzzwords.
Yeah.
And it's like, well, this is good, isn't it? And it's like, we said all the things that we're supposed to say. And it's like, no, it sucks.
Yeah.
You have no idea. This is like a PSA.
Yeah.
It's not a movie.
There's a, so I don't know, are you aware of what Good Neighbor Stuff is? The YouTube channel?
I don't believe so.
So, the guy,
it sounds familiar, but I don't.
There's a guy, I think his name is like Beck Bennett. It's two of them are on SNL.
Beck Bennett that was on SNL, yeah.
Yeah, and Kyle, the other guy with the long hair.
Oh, yeah.
So them two and another guy, Nicholas Rutherford. Nicholas Rutherford wasn't on SNL. He's been in indie movies. They had a YouTube channel. I think they started it when they were in college. They were three friends. You can go back and watch. To this day, genuinely, I'll show you a couple when we get done because they're quick. I think some of the best YouTube skits I've ever seen. Yeah. Like very original type of comedy, very specific, like obscure references and just laugh out loud funny to me. And so I started following them on Instagram whenever I discovered their channel. And I discovered it like way late. Like it had been on YouTube for 10 years and does have a lot of views, but I just wasn't even aware of it. And the guy, Beck Bennett, I remember released like, so proud of this short that I produced. It's now available to watch on Vimeo. Like it got into Sundance, all this stuff. And I'm like, oh shit, let me go watch. Cause like they made really original stuff.
Yeah.
And I go and watch it and it's like a 10-minute short and it's just, like, he's not in it, which whatever, I don't care. But it's just like, it couldn't be less entertaining or interesting. And it's just kind of like a girl and her mom and like her dad talking. And there's like, it's not even like in your face political, but there's a couple of like backhanded anti-Trump comments or whatever. And then it just ends. And I'm like, what did I even just watch? It was like 10 minutes of wasted time. And I'm like, it's not funny. It's not interesting. It's not profound. And I'm not even trying to be a hater, whatever. I doubt he's going to see this, but it's just like, the only reason you're in Sundance is because your name's attached to it. And it's just like, I'm not saying I've made some great shit, but if you could take my short film or one of my short films that I've made and just show it to a blind audience who has no idea who made what, there's no way it would test higher just in public. Like if you could put things on their brains and like what stimulates you more, I would win. But I'm not even sniffing Sundance because I'm not a name. I don't have name actors. I don't have any kind of political stuff. And so combine that with the fact that like we were saying, moving the needle, I don't think festivals move the needle anymore. I think they've lost their way, and I think maybe it's because they got involved in the political shit. I think maybe if festivals really did truly pride themselves on being honest about what is the best content available, and that is what actually won, then I think it probably would still move the needle. But I think they've kind of fucked themselves by trying to like make money by saying the messages or using the film that was directed by a big actor or has a big actor in it. Now, no one, myself included, really respects or cares about festivals at all anymore.
Well, I mean, the credibility is definitely diminished greatly from the public towards the film industry and movie stars. And
sorry, can I say one last thing?
Yeah, go for it.
The other thing that is like an oddly empowering thing is because the power has diminished so greatly.
Yeah,
I have zero, and I know we don't have a big audience, but I have zero conscience about talking shit about it because I'm like, you have no power anymore.
No.
Like no one cares about your festival. Like no one cares about Sundance, which is the biggest festival in America. No one cares.
No.
You could win Sundance and no one cares. Well, it doesn't mean that your movie's even going to do well or get an opportunity to do well.
The other thing is like, because the barometer is the ideology and the buzzwords.
Yeah.
It creates people start getting ahead in the business who have no likability, no charisma, and simply got there because that's not the entirety of why.
No, I get what you're saying.
But they're a big part of why they're there is they've chosen to be like one of the faces of these issues.
Yeah.
Yeah. That come and go.
Or the corporation chose their demographic to be the face of their shit.
Yeah.
For not because they're interesting or brilliantly talented, because they check the box of the demographic they want.
Right. And so that innately is going to bring down the value of a movie star. It's like, well, okay, so it's not really based on charisma or the effect they have on people. It's just, do they spit back the slogans that we've forced them to swallow? Like, that's, there's got to be a better way I could have put that, but like, you know what I mean? They just regurgitate slogans. It's not. I don't know. I don't want to.
I think the silver lining of this whole thing, while it is, there's definitely a part of us, I think you would agree that it's cool, the idea of like, if Johnny Carson was still around and he had, everyone followed him, and there was like movies that were coming out that were making tons of money consistently and all this stuff. And while it is upsetting that movie theaters are falling and stuff, the flip side of it that is exciting for people like us is I think independent content has been booming for a while, with YouTube and all that stuff. That's obviously been going on for a while now, but I think the power lies with the power / the value lies within the creator now more than ever.
Well, here's the thing: if we popped off and had like however many views or whatever, now you go to a studio and you're like, well, I create things, and that's what you need is people who create things. If you can create content, I mean, people are getting like 8-9 figure deals on, people who are have a knack for world building, especially, like the Game of Thrones people and stuff. These people are getting huge deals because they need people who can actually create things.
Yeah.
And I think that, like you said, the value is going to be is back in the hands of the creators, because I alluded to this earlier. You can't have this business model sustaining, and it's where we've had the strike and things are going to be different now. I think you're going to go back to a time where it's not 300 million, 350 million IP franchise budget kind of movies forever, or that has been for, I don't even know how many years this has been now. I think you're going to have to go back to like, oh, this movie on Netflix is based on a play. Oh, this is some guy, a person who just graduated UCLA or USC Film School, now has this really intriguing, weird little indie film now. And it's like, you're going to have to find a way to entertain people with budgets that are substantially less, because it's just not sustainable. You can't spend billions of dollars and not retrieve it.
Yeah, I also think I hear this from people that are, I guess, a little more in the know specifically about the business and a little more involved in the business, and I've heard it from a couple different people, that they also just think there's going to be way less content being made in general. So like the standard before they greenlight a project, or like, we're moving with this, is just going to be way less, because there's so many shows and movies that were made that didn't make money. So it's like, we really need it to be good. You know what I mean? Which could be like, again, this is me looking at it through rose-colored glasses of like, I hope weird.
Yeah. Oh, there's a plane going over. Could be that.
Oh, okay. Yeah, it was. The other thing, I would hope that it would go to where quality of the content becomes king again. I don't know if that'll happen, because maybe they just make less projects and they're still trying to do the same bullshit. But I would hope that there's some people that are like, let's just go with what's good. Just if it's good, if it seems good, let's make it.
I think that the kind of like hardcore infusion of political ideology into movies is just not working anymore. And I don't like, if you look at the situation with like the Snow White movie.
Yeah.
I mean, that is just not working. People don't want to be inundated with this nonsense all the time. And it's like, I think they went so far with it and they thought, oh my God, all we have to do is just hammer home these societal and political issues. And that's really it. People are so stupid that all they need to do is hear these words and hear diversity and hear inclusion and hear about like the equal pay or whatever. Any of those things, we'll just throw it out there. And enough people have been conditioned now to think that's what's good.
Yeah.
That's all that's what a movie is diversity. And it's like, well, it's not working.
Yeah.
And it's just not like, it's gone so far to the other side that things, like someone said, like in society, we have a tendency to, we treat dandruff with decapitation.
That's cool.
And I think that's true.
Yeah.
Like we go so far in this other direction that it's like, so it's not going to be Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs. It's going to be Snow White and the Seven Magical People. And it's like, okay, we were on board with this stuff and we recognized there was a problem. And, but now is what you're doing to us is that you're expecting us to just, this is all we have to eat.
Yeah.
This is all there is now. Like we can't just get a good fucking movie. And that can't be the impetus of why something gets greenlit. Is like, oh, this charismatic person and this charismatic person are in a movie made by this intelligent person.
Yeah.
Like why does it have to fucking be the bullshit, And I don't think it is anymore. I think it's dwindling.
It's definitely dwindling. I think the other thing is just all aspects of that thing. I think they've realized, like all the bullshit, the messaging, I think they've realized just is bad for business in the sense that the ratings for the Oscars have gotten lower like every single year for the last 10 years.
Yeah, they're awful.
And granted, you're competing with more stuff, so I get that. But the common person that is not the Hollywood elite super far to the left politically has a distaste for that attitude. So when they blast it, common person is just like, fuck off. And they don't want to watch it. It's not fun anymore.
And the strategy from Hollywood and Hollywood executives and actors and people in these movies that it was to blame the audience. Like, you're exactly the problem, which is not an effective business strategy. It's also
it's like, hey, now you're going to lecture me and tell me that I'm a piece of shit because I don't enjoy watching you.
Right. So, I mean, it's not like, that's not really great.
So now I just hate you even more.
Yeah.
It's like, that's why I always tell people, regardless of what your cause is, I often think that having a protest or something, I'm not going to say it has zero value, but so often I think all it does is piss off the opposite side more.
Yeah, I mean, we could do a whole other hour on this, but yeah, I mean, obviously, I mean, if you examine human nature in an honest way, it's not difficult to realize that a lot of this stuff is predicated on it's really bolstering someone's personal ambition. The cause is just like it's.
Oh, I see what
you know what I mean.
Yeah,
the cause.
I want to be a part of a movement. I want to feel like I'm making a difference.
It's not the cause. I want it's what the cause does for
which is
your
why so many
brand.
people,
And
regardless of what the cause is, can't even really talk about it in detail when you go ask them.
You ask like one question, a follow up that's not a generic question, and they flail around helplessly, and within seconds start insulting you, and it's just.
Well,
but that's a big part of, I think, what happened to movies is that we kind of reached the end of these like long drawn out trends in society and business that are kind of reached the end. And it's interesting because it culminated with, I don't know about culminated, but we're at this time now with the strike where I think there is going to be a clear pre and post strike, like where the business goes because of what we talked about. Things are just not sustainable. You cannot eat this ideology. It's not entertainment. It's political human resources language. It's not. It's exhausted its usefulness even for the people who are all about it.
Yeah.
And now I think they're at a point where it's going to be like, all right, well, we can't make a $300 million buzzword movie anymore. That's just not going to do it. So maybe we have to make like $100,000, film taking a chance on somebody.
That makes a shitload of money.
Or a movie, or it just makes $1 million.
Mm-hmm.
And then it's like, oh, we didn't. Our expectation wasn't, or like our.
But the idea would be
need to bring in $1 billion.
But that's the thing. But that's the thing that's so wild. If you make a bunch of them, let's say 200. Let's even be a little more generous. You're making a bunch of $200 movies.
Yeah.
And majority of them make like 500,000 to $1 million back. And then, but every now and then you smash that one that makes like 60 million back. It's just like, that's an insane profit margin.
Right.
It's like, that's Napoleon Dynamite, you know? That sounds like a really cool business model. From a business perspective, I'm like, like low risk because we're not putting nearly as much money in.
I think it's going to have to. I think just like how Netflix kind of recognized, like, okay, we're going to have to put up like actual comedians doing stand-up specials. It can't just be one like activist after the next. Like you know, using the art form of stand-up quality to deliver their activism. Like they did that. It didn't really work. It's not funny. And it's like, oh, I guess we're going to have to put up actual funny people. Yeah. And that's, you know, now you have Shane Gillis up there. You have like Mark Norman, people saying pretty outrageous shit.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think for a long time, especially very crafty, politically corporate minded people who get into the art world, the entertainment world, kind of sussed out like, oh, if I start banging on about this cause, I and the cause are one and the same. I am synonymous with the cause. So it's not like in my you know, in my profile it doesn't have to say writer and producer anymore, because I can throw an activist. Yeah. You know, and look at all the activists. See me at this rally, see me here, and then you talk to these people and there's nothing genuine or interesting about what they have to say. Yeah. At all. And it's like, oh, so this cause was about how to get you more. You know, how do I get more roles? How do I get represented more? And it's just like, okay, I get that, but like after 6 or 7 years, forgive me if I'm just like, I think I'm out. I think I'm out. Yeah. No. I wish you all the best, but like I'd rather just make things, and if it costs $1,000 to make and I make $1,000 to whatever, then I would much rather do that. Which is like the spirit of what like Tarantino did. I mean, he made he put all of his money together and made a movie over like, I don't know, however many weekends, rented camera equipment, you know. And I think that is what we're gonna have to like come back to.
Yeah, that makes sense. I say we do one more topic about Tarantino and then wrap it up.
Sure.
All right, let's think of something good.
Let's see. What could we talk about? We could talk about.
Let's maybe not do Once Upon a Time because we've talked about that so much. It's something with Django.
Or
I'm trying to think about movies that I know the best, or probably the ones that I know the best after Once Upon a Time would be Django, Inglorious. No, Django, Inglorious, and Pulp.
Okay.
But maybe it doesn't even have to be specific about that. It could be just kind of like a thing about Tarantino in general, if something comes to mind.
I mean, a thing I like about Tarantino, not to like he is a world builder, you know, and he the fake brands that he makes and all that kind of stuff.
He does make, I mean, that is a good thing that we can talk about. We talked about it on the Once Upon a Time one, but I had said, you know, or we had talked about how fun it would seem like to live in that world, specifically the 70s or late 60s.
Once Upon a Time took place in 1969.
Yeah. I mean, a lot of them do feel like a cool era to live in. I mean, it sounds fucked up when you're talking about like Django or Inglourious Bastards, but it's just like, but I think because it's like in the same way that a culture that is different is interesting.
Yeah.
Like if you travel somewhere, like the idea of taking a siesta is like where the whole city or town shuts down from 2 to 5. Because it's not every day to us, it feels cool or interesting.
Yeah.
And I think you can even do that with places in America, like the public transit, like Chicago, like the railway system. Because I've never lived somewhere where that's been a common thing. When I went there for like a week and a half, it was like cool. I was nerding out, getting like my pass and like putting money on it, and like I kind of learned like the Airbnb I was staying at. There was one literally like half a block away, so it's like I wake up in the morning, I go to my place, and there is like a cool element of that. But if you're living with it every day, it's not that interesting. But
well, yeah, I mean, he is able to take like these kind of day-to-day esoteric things and make them cinematic.
Yeah, and like so much of what you see in his movies is not what your life is, because they take place in a different time or a different area. And so, it makes it feel ultimately very romantic, and he does it in a very cool way.
Yeah, and the thing I would say about Tarantino to maybe like start to wrap it up is that like from what I've heard, his sets are an absolute blast to be on. He plays music in between, and like they have all these funny little games that they play, and like there's like these little traditions that you become a part of, and
it's really cool. I didn't know that.
Yeah, like they shoot on film, and after every 100 reams of film or 100 reels of film, they like, I think they like bust out like champagne or something, like have a drink or something like that. I know they were saying, like, I know one of the things they do is he'll get a take, right, and he'll have everything he needs, but he'll say, and everybody chimes in and says this. He's like, all right, everybody, we got the take, we got everything we need, but we're gonna do one more. Why? And apparently the crew and all the actors chant back, because we love making movies. And I just think, man, that would sounds like the best time to be around a guy who, like, his passion for the movie is infectious. It's his heart and soul. He wrote it. He's the one that made it. And it's like, he is on top of that is just this cool guy who creates this awesome environment for actors and people to work in. And it just seems like, the ultimate movie fan that he is creates like the ultimate movie experience for people making movies.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I think that's awesome. The last thing I'll say is something that I've talked to you about, I know, but I don't think we were recording when we talked about it. But Austin Butler talked about how nervous he was because like the first scene he was shooting, I'm pretty sure, and Once Upon a Time in Hollywood was the scene where it's nighttime and he's in the car and Leo comes out and confronts him and
really?
all that stuff. And so it's this night shoot. It's like 3 a.m. and everything. And maybe they had done some shooting yet, or I'm not sure if it was Austin Butler had already shot some stuff. I think he had shot a couple takes or whatever. And then they're taking a break, and Quentin had gotten, I think, a crepe truck.
Yeah.
And so it's 3 a.m. Like everyone's tired and stuff. And like, obviously he had gotten the part and stuff, but he was still like intimidated by the idea of Quentin and stuff. And he said he's just kind of standing by himself. Austin Butler is like eating his crepe or whatever. And Tarantino just kind of like walks up and he's like standing next to him. And Tarantino just goes, man, how great is this? And he was like, he just goes, just eating crepes, making movies. Like, how great is this? And he's just so happy to be there. Yeah. And also like, I mean, obviously Austin Butler, think whatever you want about him. He's a happening actor of the moment. I don't think he was really at that time. Maybe not as much.
Not as much.
But it's like for Tarantino to be selfless in that, like, he's not above everyone else and talking down to them. It's just like, yeah, we're just all people making movies and this is fun. Like, we're all a team.
He seems like just like a fun, geeky guy who like it creates like this, like just awesome environment. One thing about Once Upon a Time in Hollywood, which he was telling this story about the guy who played Bruce Lee. So this guy, I think his name is Mike Moe. He, was in LA trying to make it and stuff like that and didn't get any opportunities. So then he went back to Wisconsin to like open a dojo or some like, martial arts training place or whatever. And then he got the thing about That's Once awesome. Upon a Time in Hollywood, sent in a tape, blah, blah, blah. So this guy then is going, he's like, he didn't get any other pages or anything. And Tarantino's like clocked this and thought he got like a really big kick out of it. So he like, he goes to the first table read and, Al Pacino walks in and you can tell the guy's like, wow, okay. Like, I didn't know Al Pacino was in this movie. And then he's like, and then like Luke Perry walks in, Brad Pitt walks in. And at the time, Burt Reynolds walks in because Burt Reynolds was going to be, what's his name?
Bruce Dern.
Right.
Yeah.
And you could tell, and this guy who, and I'm just thinking, what an amazing experience. Like, you just packed up and moved back to Wisconsin, thought it was over, and now you're in this Tarantino movie, which is like the amalgamation of like this huge filmography coming together in this movie with all these giant stars talking, a story about Hollywood. And it's like, that had to have been like the most mind-blowing, coolest thing to be sitting there at a table read with Brad Pitt and Margot Robbie and Leonardo DiCaprio and Al Pacino and Burt Reynolds and Quentin Tarantino and Kurt Russell and like,
Yeah, dude, I'm just going to bring this up because you're talking about it and it's making me think like, oh yeah, all these other cool experiences. Like getting the approval of someone that you admire is like just the greatest feeling in the world. And this has nothing to do with me, but just two stories came to my mind. I listen to Armchair Experts sometimes, Dax Shepard's podcast. Yeah. And he's open about like his complete like man crush that he has on Brad Pitt and how his whole life when he was a kid, like he wanted to be Brad Pitt, like he wanted to be in Fight Club, like he wanted to be that actor. And they talk about how when he had made his movie, like one of his I think like his first indie movie that he directed was Hit and Run, which I think he did for like incredibly low budget movie. Like for, even though it's like Bradley Cooper and Dax Shepard and like kind of some other name actors, all the big actors in it did it for basically no money because they're friends with Dax and like he had no money to make it and stuff. and he was out at some party, and Kristen Bell, Dax's wife, knows that Dax is a huge Brad Pitt fan, and it was like they ended up at this party sitting close to them or something, and Dax is like so nervous, and Brad Pitt like looks at him, and this is right when Hit and Run had come out, and he was like, "Hey man, I saw your movie." He's like, "That was fucking awesome," and was like asking him all these questions about the movie and stuff, and he said it just like he couldn't even imagine, like his biggest idol being like, "I saw that movie." But the other one that I want to bring up that's like funnier than that, but is I think equally cool, is something that I heard on Fighter and the Kid. Brian Callen was in some table reading some way somehow where I think he wasn't even playing the part.
Was it with Tom Cruise?
Yes.
Yeah.
Dude, that is such a great story. I'm just going to tell it real quick. But like, so Brian is doing the reading for this part in a movie, and Tom Cruise is there too and doing the reading. And then later on, Brian runs into him like months later at a party, and he says, "Hey, I'm Brian. Like we met in that table reading or whatever." And Tom Cruise is like, "Oh yeah," and nods, and he goes, and he clearly doesn't remember me at all. And then we're talking. Everybody, like the group, is talking about different stuff. And then he said, and just out of nowhere, Tom Cruise, like it hits him, like he remembers, and he just looks at him and he goes, "Hey, I do remember you." And he goes, "You were so good in that reading." And that's just such a funny thing for me to imagine in my head of Tom Cruise, the realization happening, and just that laser Tom Cruise focus. I'm just like, you were incredible in that reading or whatever you would say.
That would melt my heart.
That would be an amazing feeling.
Yeah.
Well, all right.
Yeah.
So that's Tarantino somewhat. We didn't talk about Tarantino probably that much, but we're going to come back. We love him too much. We're going to circle back. But yeah, thanks for tuning in to episode 2 of whatever this is. I don't even know what to call it, Subtle and Nuanced anymore. But
for now.
Yeah.
It works.
All right. Later.
Working title.
2 down.